Hey guys, Gareso here. Welcome to Cleanup Master's workflow overview. The whole idea behind Cleanup Master is to work with as few layers as possible, not just for the sake of having a cleaner timeline. By keeping everything on a single layer, you can adjust multiple elements at once, chain stack order freely, and avoid splitting layers or using any other complicated workarounds. This is, above all, a new way of thinking about cleanup and shape layers in After Effects. In this video, I'll show you how I approach my animations using this toolbar. Keep in mind that there are always countless ways to achieve the same result. Think of this as a guide you can adapt to your own preferences. The more you practice, the better you get at choosing the fastest and most effective route. This tool isn't a magic solution. Animation is a labor-intensive process, and cleanup's no different. But if you're willing to give this workflow a try and rethink the way you work, I'm confident it will make your life much easier. Let's get to it. Right, so you might do it yourself or get it from another artist, but every project begins with a design. I made this one in Illustrator, but the software doesn't really matter. It could even be a flat image. But before we start animating, we need to know how our character looks. Most of the time, for motion graphics driven projects, you'll be working with one or two poses of your character as reference. So it's very helpful to have it in a pose that's going to be used in the animation. Since this is an animation workflow video, I won't go into the details of the design phase, but I think it was important to include it here as it's a crucial part of the process. With the design ready, it's time for the rough pass. And for me, this is where most of the fun is. Working without classic rigs means you can jump right in and start playing around with action ideas, timing, composition, camera angles, and so on. No setups, just sit down and draw. Be messy or more precise, go wild, test ideas. Use simple shapes to experiment with movement. I enjoy the freedom of starting very rough. Quickly testing actions and timing helps me see what works and what doesn't. Once the rough pass is done, you have solved most of the animation. Now go back, refine the drawings and correct proportions. I highly recommend ToonSquid for rough passes. ToonSquid is an iPad app, but you can use any drawing software with a timeline really. Find the one that you are most comfortable with and have fun. Okay, so this is the rough pass for the animation we are working on today. Now that we are happy with our rough pass, it's time to bring the design into After Effects and clean up the animation. You can use tools like Overlord to transfer your design from Illustrator, but honestly, more often than not, it's better to just trace it directly in After Effects, because then you can control the number and position of points, separate elements according to your needs, and ignore the details we are only adding later. So let's put the design in the timeline and change the blending mode of the rough pass to multiply so we can see both at the same time. Let's find the design frame to use it as a reference and scale the design to match the rough pass. I'll hide the rough pass for now and let me lock the design layer just in case. Now, with the pen tool, we just start tracing the shapes over the design. At this stage, I remove the fill and set a very bright stroke color so we know what's being traced. The idea here is to use the least amount of points as possible and to separate the shapes as if we were preparing the character for rigging, which makes it easier to edit the poses and isolate parts of the character as we go. You can leave open shapes if you have stroke details like we do in this design. At this stage, we are only tracing the main shapes, leaving most of the details for later, so we have less elements to deal with. We can attach these details to points later and reuse animation. As we trace, we can also solo the shape being traced to avoid creating points in overlapping shapes. Then we can review all shapes back again to continue. So this is all there is to it. With time, you get a better hang of how to better separate the shapes and where to place your points. I've sped up the video of course, but the main shapes are all traced now and we are ready to move to the next step. With the design traced, before we move on, we need to put some order to the chaos, so we don't get lost down the track. I'll hide the design and let me change the background color as well so we can see the shapes better. So one of the great things about Cleanup Master is that every function works with point selections in the comp viewer. So you can just select a point here, click the renamer tool and rename it. This one is the helmet line, the head, the collar, right shoulder, and so on. We can just keep going, selecting points and renaming until we've renamed everything. You can check the Properties panel or the timeline to check if everything was renamed. And as you can see, all shapes have been renamed. After renaming, we can fill the shapes with the design colors and adjust the stacking order. I'll duplicate the design layer and put it on top here as a reference. Now I'll just go ahead and start sourcing the colors from the design and add them to the fills and strokes. After we finish this process, we can clearly see what needs to be fixed in terms of stacking order. So let's go ahead and start moving things around. This is just a starting point, as we can and probably will adjust the stacking order as we progress with the cleanup. We can also fix any issues we may find as we go. At this stage, we can also apply clipping masks. In this case, I'll clip the collar to the torso here. Let's also fix the helmet, and that's it. We are ready to start adding some keyframes now. Right, I've just moved the rough path to the top and I'll reduce its opacity to 40%, or maybe 50%. Next, I'll select the character layer and hit the keyframe button. That will create a keyframe for every single shape at the current time. I'm starting in the middle of the timeline because that's the frame that matches our design. Let's move to the previous frame and start adding more keyframes. I decided to work backwards here, but to be honest, it's usually best to work forwards. Anyway, so now all we have to do is to adjust all the shapes to match this new pose. The advantages of working in a single layer is that you can change as many shapes as you want at the same time, instead of digging through many layers. So I'll just start with the left leg here, selecting and moving the points I want. If I double click one of the points, it allows me to transform the points together. I can change the anchor points of the selection and rotate the points, for example. I'll keep going, selecting points, transforming, repositioning. If I want to move all points in many shapes at once, I can just select a few points and use the Select All Points feature by holding Option on a Mac or Alt on Windows and clicking the solo button. It will select all points of the selected shapes so you can move and transform them at the same time. That's incredibly handy for poses that are very similar to the previous one. Then it's just a matter of making small tweaks, changing the remaining shapes, and we're done with this frame. Soloing is also very handy to isolate parts of the character so you can focus on specific areas without the clutter. As I speed up the process, you see that I keep soloing shapes, focusing on specific parts of the character for precision, and just repeating the same process over and over again. Here I noticed it would be better to have the left hand and forearm on top of the right leg, so it's perfectly fine to just go in and change the order. Okay, another frame's done, but now I noticed there was no keyframe for one of the shapes in the previous frame, and as we are using linear keyframes, it's interpolating between the frames, but we don't want that. This is not mandatory, but I'll open my keyframe influencer toolbar, which is free by the way, to transform all keyframes to hold keyframes by pressing this button, so we stop worrying about interpolations. And now let's fix the hand on this frame here. Nice, another frame down. Right, here I notice we don't need the left shoulder and the left arm for this frame, as they go behind the character. When shapes are not needed anymore, I like to drag them outside of the canvas, so they don't get in the way. The less clutter we have, the better. Then I'll flip the forearm and match the rough pass. Just be careful with flipping if you're using interpolation. As we are not using it here, flipping is the fastest way to achieve our goal. At this frame, as we move the arm in front of the legs before, we need to use the stacking feature to basically animate the stacking order. All we have to do is select at least one point in each shape and click the button. Bam! The shapes go to the back. I'll show in the timeline what's happening here. As you can see at the bottom of the stack here, the script created two inverted opacity groups, which are perfect clones of the main groups. And we're just switching between them. Okay, let's keep going. Another thing I'd like to mention is that when you're using open shapes, but you need them closed on some frames, a good trick to avoid closing and having to open them again is to align the endpoints on top of each other, leaving the shapes open. Alright, let's keep going. Another thing to note is that you can reuse shapes as well. If you get to a pose where a previous shape matches the current pose better, you can just go to that frame, use the copy shape state button, go back to the frame you're working on, and holding Option or Alt, click the button again to paste the shape. The shape will be pasted in its original position, but we can now just move it to the right position. I think it's easier than redrawing it. Don't forget you can use the Collapse Points tool to align points together and avoid gaps and other issues. And that's basically it. Just repeat until you have the whole animation done. With the base shapes clean, we can move to the next step and start reusing animation and adding details to speed up the process. One of the main advantages of cleaning up in After Effects is having all the points information available. That allows us to add details with very little effort after the main shapes are cleaned up. With Cleanup Master, we can parent any shape inside a shape layer to a null. That way, we can keep all elements within the same layer if we want to. So I'll move the design to the top for easier reference, and I'll scrub the timeline to the frame that matches our design. Now I'll start tracing the details. Let's do the tie paddings first. Then I'll change the stroke color and thickness and change the fill color. We're not seeing any changes here because the design layer is on top, but that's fine for now. I'll rename it to L tie padding and I'll just duplicate it as the other one is exactly the same. And move it in place by transforming the shape. Great, so let me hide the design now and review all the other shapes. Next, I need to move both details to the right stacking order. Now we need to create nulls to parent the shapes to them. We already have points where we attach the paddings to the tie, but we could also create new points if needed. One important thing to note is that the points need Bezier handles if we are using the rotation information, and most of the time we are. So we need to make sure the point has handles on all frames for the parenting to work properly. I'll just go ahead and check all frames. And add handles where the points are linear. Nice, let's go back to the reference frame, and now we are ready to add the null by clicking this button here. The null is created with proper naming, so you keep things organized. I'll do the same thing to the other tie now, and create the other null. Now that we have both nulls, we can go ahead and parent the paddings to the nulls. Let's go back to the reference frame again, select the left padding, and hit the Parent Shapes to Null button. We have the right null already selected, so we just have to click OK. I'll do the same to the other one now. And that's it. If we play the animation, you can see that they are following the action perfectly. We can always tweak the position of the points if we want to fine-tune the position of the details. Sometimes parenting alone is not enough, and we also need to animate the details. But using the parenting first still saves a lot of work. I'll trace these tie stripes here to show what I mean. When possible, I also like to combine objects into one shape, so instead of drawing two stripes, I draw only one shape like this. So let's remove the fill and change the stroke color and thickness. Let me hide the design so we can see it. Right, let's rename it to R-tie stripes. We already have the null we created for the right tie, so let's just parent it to the same null. Now, if we play the animation, you can see that the stripes are following the movement, but we need to change their shape to match the leg shape. We can add a keyframe just to that shape by pressing the keyframe button. Let's isolate the keyframe in the timeline by using the Rename Tool Select feature, holding Option or Alt and pressing the button. Then we double tap S on the keyboard to review only the shape's keyframes in the timeline. Let's make this keyframe a hold keyframe now. This time, I'll start adjusting the shape from frame 0, and then do the same for all the other frames. Next, I'll just move it to the right stacking order, above the right tie. But there is another thing to fix here. We need the stroke to be on top of the stripes. I'll cover this in the next section. Okay, so here's a quick tip for separating strokes and fills, so you can have the stroke on top of other elements. All you have to do is come down to the timeline, select the shape, and go to Edit, Copy with Relative Property Links, then select Contents, paste it, then move it above the other shapes. Let's just rename it to Clone Lines, and inside it, hide the fill on this one, then go to the original and hide the stroke there. That's it, the clone will always follow any changes you make to the original, so you don't need to worry about this anymore. When a shape is being clipped by another closed shape, like these left shoulder stripes here, instead of separating the stroke, we can use another trick. If we come to the timeline and select the mask shape group, we can add an offset path to this group to contract or expand the mask by changing the offset path's amount. In this case, a value of -1 is enough to prevent the stripes from going over the stroke here. In many situations, you have details made out of strokes, like the stripes on the thighs and on the shoulder here. We didn't need to clip the stripes on the thigh as they are hidden behind other shapes and share the same color as the lower leg, but we do need to clip them on the shoulder here. The problem is, when using merge paths with strokes, After Effects always close the shapes, and we don't want that here. In Cleanup Master, there is a solution for that. All you have to do is hold Command on a Mac or Ctrl on Windows to use the Convert Strokes to Shapes feature. The script will create a shape that's a perfect copy of the stroke. By doing that, we guarantee that the strokes are clipped the right way. You can also control the resolution of that shape on the Effects panel. And if the points of the new shape make it confusing to edit the original path, you can temporarily disable it by checking this checkbox here. Then just uncheck to show the shape again. Cleanup Master is also prepared to deal with shape grouping. So for example, we have the ball stitches here. We can go ahead and draw all the strokes separately and group them together later. One quick tip for drawing separate shapes is to press Command or Control or even Option or Alt and click anywhere before drawing the next shape. That will prevent After Effects from continuing to draw the same shape and force it to start a new one. So let's keep drawing all the strokes here. I'll select them all in the timeline here and batch rename them. Let's call them ball stitches. The script will add a number to each of them. So now we can keep the selection in the timeline, or we can also select them on the comp viewer here, and holding Command or Control, we can group them together. Let's call this group Ball Details Group. Now that we have this group, we can even add other elements to it. So I'll draw the other stripes here, change the color and remove the stroke, and draw the other one. Rename them Ball Stripe, and move them inside the group. Now I'll create a node to follow the ball. And then, when I select any of the shapes within that group, if I hold Shift, the script will always target the main group instead of the selected shape. The same goes for other buttons, like the Renamer or the Stacking buttons. Let me just hide the design once again. And you can see that now the whole group will follow the node, not only the selected shapes. Clipping masks, on the other hand, need to be applied per shape, so I'll select the shapes and clip them to the ball. We just need to move the group to the right stacking order, and that's it. Another very useful feature is the Paths to Masks function. Here I wanted to add the shadows to the leg, but the shadow needs to be clipped by more than one shape at the same time. So one solution to that is to select all the shapes you want to clip the shadow to, and create a new layer with masks linked to them by pressing this button. In this new layer, as we have masks, we can draw the shadow and it will be confined to the masks. I'll just rename the shape to R-Tie Shadow, and let's parent it to the node I created before. Let's also add a new mask to that same layer. To do that, we need to hold Option or Alt and click the button. We can leave the Subtract checkbox checked, then select the left tie shadow layer, which is this one here. Now it's just a matter of creating a keyframe, selecting it with the Renamer selector function, double tapping S, and making it a hold keyframe. Then just go and adjust the shape where needed. We can always add more masks to that layer, like the right tie padding here. Just select it on the character layer and click the button holding Option or Alt and selecting the same layer again. And that's it, we can go ahead and do the same for the other shadows. Shadows don't always need to be on another layer. For simpler shadows, we can just treat them as details, parenting and clipping them to other shapes. I'll just draw the arm shadow here on the character layer. Let me rename it to Left Arm Shadow, parent it to the existing left hand node, and move it to the right stacking order. Oops, I just noticed this is actually the right arm shadow, so I'll quickly rename it and move it below the right arm here. Then we parent it to the right node, which is the right hand node. Let me hide the design again and review all shapes, and finally I'll clip the shadow to the torso. And that's it, all working like a charm. So this is the final result with all the details added. By focusing on the main shapes first and then using the point information to add details later, you can greatly speed up the cleanup process. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's still a lot of work and it takes practice to master. My goal with this tool is to simplify and optimize the process, not only to make it faster, but also more enjoyable. This is a tool I use every day and it's completely changed the way I work. I hope it does the same for you. If anything wasn't clear, feel free to ask in the comments section. Thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.